philosophy matters.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Jack here. I'm excited. This is the 12th episode of ZeroState. So we keep trucking along. Things are going pretty well. And we have a special guest today who is the owner and editor-in-chief of LibertyBlock.com. And he is a serial author. He has authored a ton of books and has another one coming out very soon. And his name is Alu Axelman. So welcome, Alu. How are you doing?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be with you too. In terms of having a lot of similar interests across the board, whether we have our Eastern ladies or our interest in liberty and books and things like that. So it's great to have a fellow traveler here on the show.
Yeah. By the way, your intro is awesome. That's my first time seeing it. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I hired many children overseas to make that. So no, okay. But the yeah, that's a good intro. I definitely like it too. So, and you actually have a new book coming out very soon. Could you tell us a little about your most recent work that you're about to release?
Yes, sir. It is called Presumed Guilty. The cover will look something like this. I'm hoping to publish it in around a week. Just waiting for one more thing, and then I'm going to self-publish it on Amazon. I realized over the last year or two, so I've been doing liberty activism, voluntarist activism, similar to you, for the last around 5 years here in New Hampshire. And over the last kind of year or two, I've just been on a rampage about procedural due process. And I recently learned you're a lawyer, so obviously you'll understand this stuff. But for all the non-lawyer listeners and viewers, I've been just going crazy the last year or two. I've realized that we all learn in first grade that in this great country of America, the great freedom, freest state country in the world, we're not punished until convicted by a jury. We're presumed innocent until proven guilty. We have the great presumption of innocence, and it's the freest, most just country in history of existence, and it's all rainbows and unicorns, and we're never punished until we're convicted in court, adjudicated as guilty or plead guilty. And then I realized there are so many instances, different entire areas of law where we're punished before we are convicted. And there's so many areas. And at first I thought there were 5 or 10. And then over the last year or so writing the book, I realized there are more than, 5 or 10. Now there are 28 chapters. So every chapter kind of addresses a different entire area of mostly criminal law, and then some other less criminal, like more civil or administrative or constitutional law, or just other areas where the government punishes people using semi-private lawfare, like civil lawsuits from the government. So in like 26 different areas, we are punished by the government before being convicted by a jury. And this is like almost everyone agrees, the right and the left and middle and voluntarists, everyone, that it's wrong for the government to punish people before convicting them with a jury in court. And this is like one of the biggest issues, the cornerstone of civilization. Everyone agrees, 100% of people, pretty much the cornerstone of any civilized society, whatever civilized means to you, is having a justice system that doesn't punish you before convicting you of guilt. So that's why I think this is so important. And hopefully it will be like my first book that's not just read by libertarians or conservatives. Hopefully everyone on all sides appreciates this book.
So what inspired you to go down this path of talking about these issues with people being effectively punished through the legal system and by judges before they're actually convicted?
Well, I think I just saw in my liberty activism, I saw that there are so many areas. Self-defense law is something I wrote about a few articles, 2 or 3 articles I published on libertyblog.com about. In self-defense, you are presumed guilty. Even if someone comes into your house and says, I'm going to kill all of you and start shooting at you, if you shoot back, best case scenario, in almost 100% of cases, even in states with stand your ground, castle doctrine, and all that crap, even the most amazing states, Florida, Wyoming, New Hampshire, with all the best laws, police will come. They will arrest you around almost 100% of the time, arrest you, take all the firearms and ammo from your house, and then the burden of proof shifts to you because you're behind bars. So, once they're in jail and your guns are in the police department locker because they've seized it with asset forfeiture, the burden of proof is on you, and then you have to go pay a lawyer a few $1 million to get out of jail, not get convicted, and then a few $1 million for an asset forfeiture lawyer to get your guns back, which in most cases takes, I think, a few years if you ever do get it back, and you usually don't, because you have to convince a judge to compel police, which is his coworkers, they both work for the government, to give you your property back, your guns. So self-defense law is a big one, but also asset forfeiture, the whole idea of criminal and civil asset forfeiture, where the government can take your property if the cop thinks, not convicting you, if they think that in the past, present, or future, the property might be related to any crime. So if your grandson sells cannabis in your basement, your house is taken from you because your house was somewhat involved in that crime. And the same goes for vehicles, cash, guns. Very often, I have a lot of stories in the book. We have a whole chapter on asset forfeiture where cops pull a guy over, or someone's in an airport and they're looking at his property and they see he has cash, and the cop just thinks that's too much cash. It doesn't make sense. It must have been gotten from a crime. You must have made it from selling drugs. $10,000 cash. Come on, Jack. No one carries that much. You must be a criminal. So without convicting you, they assume the worst. They take your money, and then you have to try to pay a lawyer, probably more money than they even took, pay a lawyer to try to get it back. So it's just sickening. So asset forfeiture is another chapter. So self-defense law, asset forfeiture, gun laws, like I said, and a whole lot of others. So 26 total. I don't even have time to talk about all the chapters, but you got to read it because it's so much information. It's my longest book. I think my best book. Almost every single fact, pretty much everything I say in the book is sourced. So I just checked last night; it has over 550 sources. So the footnotes over 550 total.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I definitely familiar with that. Obviously, having worked in law and in specifically criminal defense, and having studied the nature of civil asset forfeiture, and seeing how property is dropped to a lower standard than, for an individual. They, treat it almost like a civil claim. And they have a lower standard for, preponderance of the evidence in terms of taking your property and then trying to get it back again under that same standard. And so I have definitely seen civil asset forfeiture be weaponized against people. And, as you noted, if you don't have the resources to fight it, it's very expensive, and you might not even think it's worth it to try to get back what was stolen from you. If you think it's going to cost more to hire a lawyer to, file a motion for Rep. Levin and other things like that. So it's definitely something that affects a lot of people. And I think that the more people realize how dangerous of a legal precedent this is, the better it will be, and people, will get behind trying to end civil asset forfeiture. In your research and studies, did you talk about any work by any particular legal foundations like the Institute for Justice or Pacific Legal Foundation, things like that, and talk about these kinds of cases?
Yeah, well, in the chapter about asset forfeiture, the Institute for Justice is quoted a lot because they do a lot of work on that area. And I just met someone from Institute for Justice who came up here to New Hampshire to testify about a bill in the Senate that passed the House about reforming asset forfeiture and maybe shifting the burden of proof to the government to steal your stuff instead of on you. So I quote IJ a lot throughout the whole book for various chapters because they're awesome. And also I quote ACLU and a whole bunch of other organizations. For instance, we have a whole chapter on just the wrongful convictions. So obviously I would consider it somewhat of a due process violation if you are convicted by corrupt cops and prosecutors who lie on the stand. So that's another whole big issue. So we have a whole thing on wrongful, fraudulent convictions and some exonerations after 30 years in prisons. The police and the prosecutors and judge says, oops, I made a mistake. So we'll let you out of prison and no harm, no foul, right? Because I let you out of prison. So it's like, well, I lost 30 years of my life. I missed my kid's childhood. But yeah, so in that we source, I reference the Innocence Project and a whole bunch of other really good groups who do work on exonerations and false convictions. So yeah, there are a bunch of really, really good these kind of public interest law firms and other organizations. So I mean, my favorites are IJ and ACLU, but there are a whole bunch that do some really good work.
So would you say, like in the title of one of your other books, The Blueprint for Liberty, in your upcoming book, do you also provide a blueprint for what needs to be changed in these specific fields of law to make it more ethical and just, toward actually respecting body and property rights?
Excellent question. So in every chapter or some of the chapters, at least, or most, I do mention some ideas that I've had for reforms for asset forfeiture. Like I said, we can just shift the burden of proof to the government and make sure they get a conviction before they can take your property. So I have a lot of ideas for a lot of the different violations of due process. But here's the crazy thing. So you and all my viewers know how big I am on secession, and now I'm officially with the FNHI. So officially, secession is my biggest issue. Every book, like The Blueprint for Liberty, and every book I've written is really about independence, or at least references independence as the solution. This was going to be a book all about due process. I've been just super focused on just due process, criminal justice for the past year. But throughout writing the book, I realized almost every single issue was federal. Almost every single issue was either a federal law, like asset forfeiture or other federal laws, or court cases, or just federally influenced. I talk a lot about other violations that are straight up done by the state, so that the state and local police operate them, but they're totally federally funded. So I realized by the end of the book, in the final chapter, I'm like, okay, here's an interesting conclusion chapter or an interesting twist. If we just sever ties with DC, almost everything in the book is totally solved. Because I reference also like 50 Supreme Court cases. So in almost every single area, I think every chapter, I reference the Supreme Court case that has affirmed that this violation of due process is totally constitutional. Meaning, as I'm sure you're familiar with stare decisis and how big they are on precedent, it's very rare for the Supreme Court to adjust or overturn any precedent, especially when it's an authoritarian one. So it's extremely rare. So the people say secession is very unlikely, and it is. It's 1 in a million. I think that's inevitable, but it's also kind of unlikely right now. But even less likely is Supreme Court totally flipping some of these doctrines. Qualified immunity, asset forfeiture, Kelo versus New London, which is still pretty astounding because we have a whole chapter on eminent domain, and open field doctrine. All these horrible cases, I don't think they'll ever be overturned. The Supreme Court's only ever going to get more authoritarian. So, there are so many federal laws, federal grants, influence, doctrines, so many federal programs that if we just sever ties with DC, so when New Hampshire and Florida and all the states sever ties with DC and become independently governed, almost all the issues in the book go away. So that's the simplest solution. So people say, oh, we could just elect better people to Congress, just vote harder, elect better people, and we'll fix all these issues separately. No, these are like 26 tremendous issues that we have to pass thousands of good laws. So what's easier, passing thousands of good laws through Congress or just severing ties with DC and go away? Severing ties is actually the easier solution here.
Yeah, I completely agree that, given how deeply entrenched the case law is with upholding these various, issues, as you noted, like the Kelo v. New London case, we're talking about eminent domain issues, or, Gonzalez v. Reich, the case where basically if you had marijuana growing on your own property, that affected interstate commerce enough in and of itself to count as a commerce clause intervention, acceptability, things like that, where they're not readily going to be overturned anytime soon, because as you said, the courts don't do that unless there's such a great change in facts or a great change in constitutional law or other law that actually applies their decision. So they they don't really change things without those types of predicate issues. So I completely agree that it's likely that secession is the most realistic result to upending these laws and having competition among various states, with obviously the ideal being getting toward individual sovereignty completely. So now when it comes to your work and your research here, has that affected or influenced you as you're considering yourself going to law school?
Yeah, well, I think over the last year, I've thought about law school for years, obviously a long time. I've been involved in political stuff. I've a brother who's a lawyer, another brother in law school. So I've definitely thought about it. But over the past year is when I really got serious, because I realized, besides for the activism, liberty activism, I'm a voluntarist. I want to, be in law so I can affect policy and help people. But just as far as the academic process of how challenging and fascinating it is, some of it is very statist, but some of it is fascinating. I do like learning about the complicated evidentiary rules and learning what affects what. It is interesting to me. So I have gotten so much more interested in it that I signed up, I guess 2 months ago, for going back to online college. I have a few credits from 10 years ago, but I did sign up again. So I'm back in full-time online school, so I can hopefully in 3 years go to law school. So I think this book, over the past year, getting so interested in due process, makes me want to do pre-law, struggle through it, find a way to get the money and time and everything to go to law school. Hopefully I can stay in the state to go to law school. There's one nearby, and then become a lawyer. And I would want to do constitutional law, something like IJ or ACLU, so I could sue the government.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly. It's a very niche area, and it's something that I have had some practice in and some tangential relationships in different cases, just dealing with criminal defense and my own research and things like that. So it's tough to find good litigants for those types of cases, simply because it's a very nuanced area of law. There's a big uphill battle, especially trying to sue over civil rights violations with 42 USC 1983 and things like that. So it's a very tough area to practice in, but that's awesome that you would like to see how you can use your skills to actually try to fight back against civil asset forfeiture and other types of rights violations. So in terms of your work and activism otherwise in New Hampshire, could you give everybody here a little rundown of your history of work and what types of things you've been involved with?
Yeah, sure. So I moved to New Hampshire from the Communist Republic of New York City in late 2017. So for 4.5 years, I've been here to work my butt off for liberty. I've been running libertyblock.com. Obviously, we have articles and videos and podcasts, mostly about New Hampshire politics. I've been trying to help NHLA, AFP, ACLU, all the good organizations around here. We have like 50 liberty or liberty adjacent organizations that work in various areas, from guns to taxes, education, and everything else. So I've been doing that, and then ran for office, had an interesting campaign, won the primary, which I was not supposed to win, and then lost the general that I was supposed to win. So extremely interesting campaign. And that was, I think, 2 years ago or so. It was a special election, so it got a fair amount of attention. Very interesting. I learned so much about political science that it was like a great free education. So I'm grateful. And since then, I've just been not running, but helping others in campaigns and trying to help get good people elected and pass good legislation. Most of what I do with Liberty Block is kind of awareness, pressuring legislators to pass good bills and stop bad bills, and just supporting legislation and supporting legislators and candidates. So that's kind of what Liberty Block does. We try to alert people to the good and the bad bills and make them support the good ones and try to stop the bad ones. And we've had some success with really bad bills. We have reached a few million. Back before Facebook shadow banned us, we've reached a few 100,000 in a few posts. So I guess a few million total people in New Hampshire for killing bad bills like new taxes and stuff. So that's kind of like the wheelhouse of the Liberty Block.
Awesome. And I noticed too with your website that you've done a number of interviews as well. Could you talk to or speak to what it is that you've done in terms of interviews and outreach and things like that?
Yeah. The Liberty Block, so mostly me as the primary New Hampshire correspondent, I try to interview as many good candidates as I can. So anyone pro-liberty running as usually Republicans or Libertarians, for local, state rep, state senate, all the way up through governor and U.S. senator. And after this, I'll be interviewing another person running for U.S. senator from New Hampshire. I try to interview all them and give them some airtime and ask them interesting questions, tough questions about liberty, and try to hold them accountable, but also promote them. So that's another big thing we do as well with our videos and podcasts.
Awesome. And with your work specifically in writing, could you talk a little bit about what it is that you've done over the years in terms of moving from self-publishing to being published with Defiance Press and what that process was like?
Yeah, very interesting story. And that was all about Corona fascism. And I could talk about Corona fascism forever. So I self-published The Blueprint for Liberty, I think around a year ago in early 2021, I believe. And that was fine. It was great. It was on Amazon. Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy you bought it and read it. So then the next book I wrote was only a few months after that. I wrote a book about Corona fascism because I was working in emergency medicine, EMS, for like 9 years, 10 years at that point. And I was seeing that people weren't all dropping like fleas like they were claiming that they were from Corona fascism. So it was really closer to a cold or the flu than anything else. It wasn't the biggest pandemic ever. So I wrote an article. I wrote, many articles about it for the site, like 20, 30 articles. And I realized there were no books about it. I think at that point, Alex Berenson had published his first booklet of his 4-part series. But other than that, there were no full-length books about it in the world. So I wrote the book real quick, and I tried uploading it to Amazon as Corona Fascism. I self-published it again, and Amazon totally blocked it. The whole thing was blocked out. I couldn't edit it, couldn't do anything with it. It was like gray, light gray, so I couldn't click any of the buttons in my bookshelf. So I kind of panicked, and I wanted to publish it. So I right away submitted that night. I submitted the manuscript to a few publishers, and 2 of them called me the next day, I believe. So that was great. And then I spoke to Defiance Press for a while, and they published my friend's book, Texit. So Daniel Miller's book, Texit. They published that one and a few other conservative libertarian books. So I saw that they were pretty open to it. So I spoke to them for a while. They published Corona Fascism. Unfortunately, they're more of a traditional publisher, so it takes like 4, 5, 6 months. So the book came out in, I think, May. So I had written it by February, March. The book came out. No, it came out in September. Sorry. I submitted it in like May. So September 2021, it came out. And now, obviously, a lot of it is outdated. So I'm looking to update it now. So I'm hoping them or I can update it. But yeah, that's why I went with the publisher. Presumed Guilty is going to be self-published. I love that I can be quick and flexible, and I have total control over that, and I can publish it quickly and update it quickly. So yeah, that's why I went with a publisher. Amazon totally blocked me. I realized Amazon has been really good about free speech. To be honest, they've blocked very few books. I heard they canceled one book about transgenderism, and then my book about corona fascism. Other than that, I've never heard of them censoring anything, which is surprising. And what's weird is that I've written about secession, voluntarism. I think in the book I mentioned in part of Blueprint for Liberty, in the ideal constitution, there would be punishments for politicians who violate the Constitution, and those punishments would result in politicians who really commit treason being punished with not being alive anymore, if you know what I mean. So like I've said some pretty aggressive stuff in books, and Amazon has not blocked it. People have said some pretty wild things, but the only things they block are transgenderism, questioning that, and corona fascism. So I guess those are the biggest crimes against Amazon.
Yeah, and I would say I have purchased a number of books about the the unmentionable contraction that were obviously critical of the mainstream narrative, from Robert F. Kennedy's book to Bregan's book that, Dr. McCullough was on. So I agree that I didn't see, at least as far as I could tell, any material censorship with Amazon, even with very credible critiques of the, state great reset narrative. So
yeah, well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Because I went to Defiance Press, and a publisher has a little more power than a self-publisher. So I submitted the same manuscript and they blocked it. But when Defiance Press, who has an account on Amazon as a publisher, it's a different system, their account, they were able to publish it. So RFK, I don't know if he self-publishes. I think he has a publisher. Yeah. So they can get away with a little bit more questionable or untraditional content that's Amazon doesn't support, more than a self-publisher can. So that's why I went with them, and they were able to get it on Amazon, and it's been there and it hasn't been blocked.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear, and that's encouraging for anybody else that there's paths around the little bit of censorship that might exist there. So that's really good to hear. So on the note of your writing a bunch of books, learning about the process of how to self-publish, publish through an official publisher, and so forth, could you tell us a little bit about how you have networked and kind of collected a kind of a group of authors together in terms of sharing tips and ideas and things like that?
Yeah, I think this is an idea I had a few months ago, but I finally did it, I think, 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. I realized that we have a bunch of pro-liberty authors who are really decent authors, like, you, Derek, me, a bunch of us are decent authors, and we've written books about liberty, and we should be supporting each other with just, buy, review the book, which is a simple thing, but also tips and other tricks for sales, media, getting on awesome podcasts like the ZeroState podcast. So all these tips and tricks, we can help each other with the network. So I put together a little Facebook group, the Liberty Writers, I believe it's called. So if you are a pro-liberty author, if you're a libertarian or voluntarist and you've written a book, please find one of us. We'll get you into this group. We have like 10, 15 people already, and it's a great group. We have some good authors, some really, really good authors who have written a few books, and we are already helping each other a lot with just getting on media and helping with other tips and marketing type stuff. So it's been a pretty good group. So I'm so happy to be in that group so far with you guys.
Awesome. And when it comes to, reflecting on your past work and thinking about the things that you've learned over these past few years, what would you say you would potentially have done differently when writing your first book if you had the knowledge you have now?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that comes to mind is something my brother teased me about a lot, and a lot of people have, and it's pretty fair, is at first it was pretty stupid. I didn't know how to adjust the Google Docs, because I write on Google Docs. I didn't know how to adjust the page setup to a smaller page size. Obviously, the standard is 8.5 by 11. And I Googled around and researched like crazy and asked friends, and nobody knew. And then I Googled it one more time a few months ago, and I found out that literally Google Docs, page setup, and you go to like the page size. It's the simplest thing in the universe. It's 2 clicks. But because I couldn't figure that out, I published my first few books in 8.5 by 11. So like Blueprint for Liberty, and this was going to be 8.5 by 11, which is big and clunky for a book. It's like, decent for like a knapsack, but for the most part, it's hard to carry. So my first 1, 2, I guess 3 books or whatever were published like 8.5 by 11 because figuring out the page format for that and then putting it into a book was impossible to change it. So it's 8.5 by 11, which is crazy. But then finally for Presumed Guilty, I figured out how to do it. So this is going to be small 8.5 by 11 or 5.5 by 8.5, pretty standard size for a book, and it's nice and thick. And you can carry it like in a small bag or something, a purse or any small knapsack. So this is going to be way better. So I am excited about that. And I realized this for this one and articles of secession. So I published this quick little booklet over the last few months, just answering a lot of the common questions about secession. People think the sky will fall and we're all going to die and starve to death. So I kind of answer like the 10 most basic questions about secession in this one.
Awesome. So would you have any other words of advice for aspiring authors based on your experience so far about things to think about or just things to avoid and, pitfalls and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say come and find me and talk to me. I would love to help you self-publish, either just help you or figure out some kind of like tiny royalty deal if I really do a ton of help for you with publishing. I would say in general, self-publishing on Amazon right now is the best way. It costs $0. And the whole thing, as far as publishing, takes about a day. They approve it in around 24 hours on average, give or take. And it has access to around 1 billion people, all the Amazon customers generally in the world, or at least most countries. And they pay you every month. So in a few months, you'll get paid for the sales. And Amazon is good because it has paperback and hardcover now and ebook, and they bought Audible ACX. So now Audible is the same thing. Self-publishing is awesome. If you do it, write the manuscript, look it over 1 million times, get some friends to look it over, maybe pay an editor. You can run programs on Google for grammar and spell check and get Grammarly for grammar and spell check and look it over 10 times, print it out, read it again in the real book because you'll find more typos that way. For some reason, I've found plenty more. Over the years, so writing like, 5, 6, 7 books or whatever, I've developed a really good format, like a good procedure. So I have certain steps I do now. I make like an outline. I call it like the master sheet because it has the chapters and the description and everything else. It does everything there. And then I kind of hyperlink to every document, and every document within that folder is a chapter, and I just build from there. So I've done this like 7 times now. So I've gotten so comfortable with this exact process for writing the books. Like my next book is going to be easier and easier. So they keep getting easier because I know what to do. And you'll discover your own tricks. If you're writing a book, you'll discover what works for you and what doesn't. As far as if it's nonfiction, you're going to want to add sources. So I make them all hyperlinks and then footnotes. So the same, I do it for a link and the footnote. So I put it in there twice. And then at the end, I put an endnotes because it's a little crazy if half the page is footnotes. So you can get an endnote generator. It's a Google add-on. It's free and it's quick and it works well to put it all at the end of the book instead of in every page, which some authors do. I think it's pretty messy. It doesn't look good. So you'll figure that out. But then if you do that, you can't adjust them anymore. So only do that at the end. Copy it, make a copy of the whole manuscript for the endnotes version. I would do that. So all these little tricks that I'm learning, and ebook is a little different. Ebook doesn't have to have the big page breaks chapter starting on top of a page. So the ebook could just be one straight through read. So it's different. That's a different page document. I have a copy it for that. So all these little tricks you'll learn as you go through. But again, if you're an author who's pro-liberty, just enter our group and we can have all these discussions in our Facebook group. And we should also make a Signal version of the group for when we get taken down.
Awesome. So when it comes to the topics that you're kind of thinking about next, because obviously, writing is a real passion of yours and it's something that it's clearly is just a part of your everyday life. Are there any books that you have, in the hopper up there that you're thinking about writing in the near future?
I have ideas for like 31 trillion more books. I have so many. So I wrote this. I have like a rough draft already for this one, which I love the cover. I just love the simplicity of this cover. I understand. Rumor has it you're familiar with those colors.
Yeah, very familiar.
So that's a whole book. It's only like that's like 20,000 words. Pretty short for now. It's about taxation. It's about what taxation is, what it's used for, the various types of taxes, the tricks they have to get more money from us, like all the hidden taxes and stuff. All the different things it's used for, mostly bad stuff, some good stuff, some neutral stuff, some waste, some corruption. And the final part of that book explains how we can totally get rid of taxes without grandma dying, without the children being hurt. We can totally get rid of it all. And even if you want services to continue, like government services, like the great roads and hospitals and the great bombs that they drop, they can continue. I'd rather them not, but they can continue. They can fund them all voluntarily very easily. I explain how with like concrete examples in the book. So there's that one. There's tons others. I want to write a book called They Fear Unity and how we can use division against them, like unity through division and then division through unity. And that one as well ends with secession. Because obviously they divide and conquer us. And the book right now is very short. It has like 10 chapters. And in that one, again, I have it printed out somewhere over here. And it kind of goes through all the different dividers they use. Black and white, rich and poor, old and young, right and left, all the different dividers, and some work better than others, some don't work at all, some work very well. Male versus female, toxic masculinity, they've been on for a few years now, gay and straight, religions, everything. So there are, 5 or 10, 15 different dividers. And then at the end of the book, I'm going to end it with, again, a crazy twist ending. No one's going to expect it from me. I'm going to say, you know what? If they want to keep dividing us, let's give them what they want. Let's divide the union. And then that takes the power away from DC politicians. And there's no more empire. And then, use their own division powers against them. So I think that's kind of interesting. So I want to write that one. I've already written the rough draft for that one. But I have so many more books I want to write. I want to write a novel. It's totally different. And I would have to learn how to do it because I've never done it. This is easy writing. Writing the government sucks many times on a page is very easy. I can do that all day. But a novel where I have to really be a different kind of creative and, create characters. I've actually written like almost a rough draft. It's like a skeleton right now, but I've been working on that very slowly over the last few months. And it would have the same underpinnings of liberty and independence. And it would be about independence. Because what I've heard from people, well, 2 reasons I want to write the novel. And one, I'm a proud capitalist. I want to make money. And novels, like 90% of readers probably read novels, whereas like 0.001% of readers read political anarchism nonfiction, right? It's a very small market we're kind of getting at, or even libertarian nonfiction stuff. My wife made me realize most people read novels because they are easier to read. When I read them quickly because they're interesting. They're like a movie. So it'll have a bigger market. I can sell to potentially 1 billion, 2 billion people, potentially, meaning bigger market. I can make more money, and I would love to make money. The other big thing is people will actually read it, meaning it can convince them. And what I'm going to do throughout the book is take things I've heard from real people about independence, take real quotes and put them in the book as some of the characters, protagonist, antagonist, or supporting characters saying those exact quotes. So for instance, when I talk about independence, people say, Alu, if we leave, we'll starve and die without them. Okay, I'm going to put that in the book. There's an abusive husband. It's a woman being abused. And he's going to say to her, or someone's going to say, baby, if you leave him, you're going to starve to death without him. You don't have a job. He has the money. He's the breadwinner. And then the protagonist will overcome that obstacle. Obviously, it's all about overcoming the obstacles. So you'll die without him. If you leave, he'll kill you. Come on, you've been together so long. You're so comfortable together. All the things you hear about divorce and you hear about national divorce, secession. So I'm going to take all those things I've heard and then use them, and they're legitimize those difficulties, those dilemmas, and then get over them. And, hopefully by the end of the book, it'll be very obvious what I'm getting at, like the woman leaving an abusive partner. But then I think like at the end, I'll write appendix or something to the book, or like the conclusion, the afterword. I'll say, hey, in case you didn't get it, like this is a euphemism for secession. We are in an abusive relationship. They've been abusing us every day, increasingly for 245 years. So for instance, if your spouse is abusing you every day for, let's not 245 years because you'd be dead at that point, 5 years, your spouse beating you every day. Imagine if Foe was beating you every day for 5 years, more and more. Why would you believe one day she'll change? Why would you believe that one day she'll stop beating you? And people say, well, once we get Trump in 2024, then it'll all be saved. If you look at the evidence, examine the evidence, there's no reason to believe that trend will not continue. So if your spouse is beating you and abusing you and cheating on you and is horrible, evil every day for 5, 10, 20 years, you should leave. And common sense and your friends would tell you to leave. They wouldn't say, no, he'll change one day. No, you'll improve him, or you'll be okay anyway. You're not going to find another partner. You'll die without him. It's ridiculous. Obviously, everyone knows that. It's ridiculous on its face. So I'm super excited for that book, but I need a lot of training and experience, and I'm going to work really hard to write a novel. But I really want to do that one so it can be read by millions of people. They'll realize, yes, divorce is not ideal. It's messy and it's complicated and it's not ideal, but if it's for the best because you're being abused, then it's for the best. So you should do it. So I'm hoping to publish that one at some point in the next few decades, because I realize I get busier and busier. And if I'm doing full-time school and work now and writing and the other activism, and I'm trying to learn piano and saxophone because I'm just like ridiculous, hopefully I can still work on that book. So that's another project. And then I have 5, 10 more books. I want to write a book about free speech, a book about anti-war, peace, and secession, obviously. So free speech and secession, everything, and secession being the answer for everything.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't even think you would need an afterword in that book, right? If you write it well enough, I think that's the best part is the mystery unveiling and leaving you with that sense of, oh, this really seems familiar. This relationship, huh? You know what I mean? Like it creates more of a lore too. So I'm excited to see what you do with that. And definitely will be interested to check that out. Who would you say would be your top two influences in terms of writing for yourself? In terms of, whatever it is that you're talking about in Liberty Sphere or otherwise, what would you say your top two influences of other authors have been?
My favorite authors of all time, I don't know. Well, as far as fiction, I would say Ayn Rand is just a phenomenal author as far as just writing skill. She's very skilled. And if I were going to write a great novel, I think that would be the one that comes to mind first, as far as a great novel that has very clear liberty themes. And it could be an interesting, captivating author who makes you read the book very quickly because you're loving it. So Ayn Rand's a big one. Let me see who else I have around here. I don't know. I mean, I do have a lot of books now, and I've actually been starting to read a lot the last few months. As far as nonfiction, let me see what I've read in the last few months. I'm going to have to even check my reading list. If you look at the reading list for the book in all my books, I got, I just read a book by James Duane. Daniel Miller was a phenomenal book. Peter Schweitzer, George Orwell, obviously, Brian Kaplan, Howard Lichtman, Ron Paul, Alex Epstein I have here. So, yeah, these are some fantastic books. If you've read Daniel Miller's book, Text It, it's phenomenal. Let me just find you again because I left your freaking page. So I can't see you. It's driving me crazy. All right. Yeah, so Peter Schweitzer's books were phenomenal. I think almost as much as Spooner, Peter Schweitzer should make you an anarchist and he's not an anarchist yet for some reason that I don't understand, because he's written a few books about corruption, like just corruption that'll astound you and make your jaw drop. And it's not just Hillary Clinton. It's not just Biden. It's almost every Republican or Democrat, from McConnell, Schumer, John Kerry, Obama, Clinton, Bush, everyone. And just regular congressmen. Almost every congressman is disgustingly in bed and corrupt with Xi Jinping and Putin and the oligarchs from Ukraine and Mongolia and Venezuela all over. Haiti, what he did in Haiti is disgusting. So Peter Schweitzer should realize that. I'm hoping one day he gets blackpilled and realizes it's not that Clinton just happened to be corrupt and Biden's corrupt. It's everyone. It's the office. It's if you and I get in the office, if you, me, and Peter are in the office, we're going to become corrupt. We'll either die a hero or live long enough to become a corrupt, disgusting villain tyrant. So it's just how it goes. So having any government is not going to work well for liberty, and you're going to become corrupt. So I think Peter Schweitzer's books are great. Dan Bongino's written a few books about corruption. I just read a book by Professor James Duane. He wrote a book about due process, at least in one area that I used a lot of his quotes in my book. He was a criminal defense lawyer, I think, and he's a law professor at Virginia Law School now, I think. He has a famous video of a law school lecture on video why you shouldn't talk to police, because anything you say will be used against you, even if you never lie, even if you're a saint, even if the cop loves you, they will use anything you say against you, especially if you misspeak about anything. But no matter what you do, they will use it to convict you and send you to prison, maybe forever. So that's a phenomenal lecture. He wrote a book pretty much saying the same thing. So I read his book. It was awesome. Yeah, so I'm finally starting to read a lot. I'm glad. I was never a big reader. My brothers were. That's why they were so much smarter than me and bigger vocabularies. But the last few years, I'm starting to read a book a week. So I just started Legally Kidnapped about CPS. Oh my God. I thought I hated the government before. I just read the first chapter and I'm like, I really hate the government now. And I was already an anarchist. So yeah, crazy stuff. I mean, the more I read, the more I learn that the government existing is totally antithetical to liberty.
I agree with that. So where can people find you and keep up with your work, check in on what your latest release is?
Yeah, thank you. So I finally made aluaxelman.com. So ALUAXELMAN.com, libertyblock.com, libertyblock.com. I am on Twitter, and hopefully I'll stop being shadow banned and struck now that Elon Musk bought it. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook, all the social medias. You can find my email. I think it's alu@libertyblock.com, the email. Pretty easy to find. And get in touch on Facebook, especially if you're pro-liberty, if you're an author. Jack and I would love to talk to you. So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure. Yeah. So everybody make sure to go check it out. Check out his books. I'm really excited for your latest book, Presumed Guilty. It's going to be a great read, I'm sure, as I've enjoyed everything else that you've been writing. So thank you so much, everybody. And I will catch you next time. I don't have an exact plan for what my next interview will be, but as you know, it'll be something fun and exciting. So take care, everybody. Talk to y'all later.
ZeroState.